Hello, Lightworkers, and welcome to Megan's Mystical Mashup, a spiritual conversation with me and a guest about life, the universe, and anything in between. My name is Megan Rounds, spiritual connector, energist, healer, and founder of Mystical Mashup. Welcome to today's show. Today's guest lives near Greenville, South Carolina with her two tuxedo cats, Mother Rosie and her son Heath. She's been a member of the Lightworkers Lab for a little over 2 years, spending most of her time here in the main lab and in the lab Lightroom, where she hosts her weekly program, Afternoon Tea with Spirit, every Saturday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time, so you can even catch it today. She's an animal communicator, intuitive reader, and energy healer of both humans and animals. Currently on an extended sabbatical from the corporate world, she is an avid reader and highly creative, which she expresses through her cooking, all types of needlework, and other crafts such as jewelry making and card making. Please give a warm Lightworkers welcome to Julie Bassett. There we go. Hi, Julie.
Hi. Hello, Megan. Hello, everyone.
Welcome to today's show. Welcome to this show, and thank you so much for agreeing to chat, to have this conversation.
I was looking forward to it.
Good, me too. Well, you've got a lot of love coming through on the comments, just so you're aware. So I hope you can feel it.
I can feel it. Thank
Good.
you.
Well, what I like to do as the big opening to this conversation is just ask you to talk about your spiritual journey, and if you can pepper in how you have come across the Lightworkers Lab and what brought you here, that would be awesome too. And then at some point I may ask you some questions, but I'd really like to hear the big picture first.
Oh, goodness. Where do I start?
Oh, and you can start wherever you want. Doesn't have to be at the beginning.
Okay. Well, I grew up in a family that was a Catholic, very devout Catholics. And so there was a lot of limiting beliefs that were ingrained in me. And my mom was a very much of a perfectionist. So that's where some of that comes. But she and my dad both loved animals. And I grew up with a German Shepherd, which I considered my sister. But I mean, she was great because I would cry on her shoulder and stuff like that. And I was an only child. But my mom and I didn't get along very well. She kind of pushed me away from religion. But that's a whole nother story.
Well, you can include that if you would like. That's up to you.
No, I want to get to the good stuff.
Okay, let's do it.
And I grew up, I always liked watching like Charmed and witches and ghost stories and things like that. So there was something brewing, even when I was growing up. And my mom passed away in December.
Of this year?
No,
okay.
About 10 years ago.
Okay.
Or actually over 10 years ago. But I'll never forget because she never called me. I would always do my daughterly duty and call her. But this time she called me, and it was really strange. But she also never told me that she loved me. But yeah, it was.
I'm sorry to hear that.
We all have our dysfunctional family life.
That we do.
But I'm grateful though for my parents because they're the ones that made me who I am today. But it was a weird call, and so She told me that she loved me and stuff like that. Well, come to find out, that happened after her death certificate said that she died. Because that next day I got a call that told me that my mom had passed away. And it was like on December 28th, and December 29th was when they found her.
Wow. Speechless.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So was I.
Well, I bet.
And then she had always wanted, she was in Wisconsin at the time, and she had always wanted a blizzard. Because she loved cold weather, she always wanted a blizzard. Well, the day of her funeral, there was a blizzard.
Oh my gosh. Go figure.
Okay, Mom. And then, moving along to, my dad died like 5-6 years ago. And at his funeral, we had it at a restaurant. My stepmom had made a video of different pictures of him. And as people were eating and drinking and things like that, the pictures would flash on this big screen. Well, we got to the point in the dinner where we were telling stories about him. Right as we were getting ready to tell stories, the computer froze on this one picture of my dad that had this typical grin on his face, like he was looking at all of us. It was, and after we finished telling his stories, it started back up again. No one was by the table, nothing. I mean, it was the freakiest thing. So my dad was definitely there.
I'll say.
And I had gone up to visit my stepmom, or she had actually had to leave, so I was there taking care of her dogs. And it kind of felt kind of strange being there. And she wanted to make sure that the door stayed closed. Well, no one was around, and it opened.
There you go.
Like, okay.
Someone disagreed with that. Someone thought otherwise, right?
So, and all this time I had been working in corporate. I started off as a medical technologist, and then I joined a startup company where I was a lab supervisor. I was employee 3 of 4, so
Ooh.
True startup.
I'll say.
And I kind of progressed in that company, and to the point where they had a product. They wanted to start selling it, but we had to get FDA clearance on it first, because it was considered a medical device. It was a DNA fingerprinting technique which helped track nosocomial infections in hospitals. And so all of a sudden I had to learn regulatory affairs.
That's
like,
a big learning thing. Wow.
Yeah, it was. And so I started doing that, and it was a very stressful job. Through several jobs, I ended up at Medtronic in Memphis, Tennessee. It was their spine and biologics division. Well, I started having back problems, along with many other people in that
Interesting.
office. And I ended up getting an implant, a spinal implant. But it was good that I was working there because I knew what doctor to go to.
Yeah. No kidding.
So things just kind of fell into place. So I had the surgery, and then 2 weeks after that, I ended up with a pulmonary embolism.
Oh, no.
So I had a clot on the bifurcation of my heart or my lungs, where it separates out into the two lobes. Because I was married at the time, and my husband was getting ready to go to work, and he said, "Are you okay?" I tried to answer. I couldn't. Nothing was coming out. And so he called the ambulance, and the ambulance came, and come to find out that I almost died, that I was intubated for 3 days. I have no recollection of any of that. But I survived. And when I went back to my primary care doctor, she was going, "Do you know how close you were to dying?" And, and here my husband's a nurse.
What?
He never picked up any of the signs that something might be wrong.
Oh my gosh.
But
Well, he knew to ask you before he went to work. I guess that part's good, right?
yeah, because if he hadn't, I probably wouldn't be here today.
Yeah. Wow.
But when I was recovering from that, it's like, life's too short. This job is very stressful. I was spending like 14, 16 hours a day at the job, coming home, trying to keep the house clean, trying to cook dinner, things like that. And I started taking classes. I said, well, I've got this time. Let me start taking classes. So I was scrolling in Facebook one day, and I saw this ad for a animal communication course. And they also included energy healing, and that's where I got my animal communication and energy healing piece. I also, at the time, became a transformational coach and a health coach because I took classes through the Institute of Integrative Nutrition.
Oh, cool.
So it's like I have all these things. What do I want to do with it?
Yeah.
But the animal communication is what really fascinated me, and because my cats were always having problems and things like that, and so it's like, well, I can use this for them. And about that time is when I found some other groups on Facebook that I joined and took some other courses. But then probably a little over 2 years ago, I found the Lightworkers Lab. And it just feels like home to me. Because I took the 2019 Intuitive Intensive, the 2019 Mediumship Intensive, the 2019 Akashic Intensive. I'm a gritter for the 2020 Intuitive Intensive right now. And that has been so much fun watching these new students get their wings and fly.
Yeah.
It just gives me chills that they're trusting. And, I was there a year ago, and I know exactly where they are. I know exactly what they're feeling. I know exactly how scared they are. But they are trusting and they are flying. And it is so much fun to see.
Good.
So much fun.
Well, and for those of you watching, if you haven't taken one of these intuitive intensives and you have an interest, I'm hopeful that they'll do this every year, but they are intensive.
They are definitely intensive. There's a lot of content. You get a lot of content for the money.
Mm-hmm. Really good value.
And it is definitely life-changing. And I'm sure all the 2020 Intuitive Intensive students will agree.
Yeah.
Because it is totally life-changing. And I don't regret it for a minute.
Would you mind? I don't want to interrupt your story if
No,
there's more to share.
that's
Okay. Well,
probably about.
what, how was it life changing? I mean, not to dwell on the program as much as how it's affected, how your life has changed since or during.
Well, I was scared to death about going live on Facebook because I had taken a business course because I wanted to try and make my animal communication a business.
Mhm.
So I took this very expensive business course. It wasn't Crystal's course, which I also took last year. Um, and it's phenomenal too. But I took this really expensive business course, and they wanted you to get up live and, you know, and hitting pain points and things like that. And it's like, I just couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. And I was scared to death of going live. Well, with the intuitive tensive, I was getting up and going live. And now I've got a weekly show where I go up live and do cards.
What do you think made the difference?
I think a lot of it has to do with the care and support that the space has. You know that you're safe. You can fail, and because that's how you learn.
Yeah.
You've got to be able to fail and pick yourself up and before you'll soar.
I tend to agree. I've personally been in other groups, not on Facebook, but just ones where they've asked for people to share some vulnerable things in a group that didn't feel safe or comfortable to do so. And I would do just like you had said and kind of just freeze up because I didn't want, I mean, I could sense enough that I knew I didn't want to share. And it was so different here in the Lightworkers Lab because you know that people are supportive and positive and want to see people thrive. And so,
and
yeah.
and Crystal and Tricia are wonderful. They're very supportive, they're very loving, and the group becomes such a community.
Yeah.
It's just amazing to see.
Yeah. Well, that's wonderful. So, when you decided to take the animal communication course, do you remember what went through your mind? What was it that, because you had made a pretty dramatic shift from a very corporate job, and yes, you had you'd recognized, it sounds like, the stress and the time and things like that were involved in knowing you wanted to make some type of transition of some sort, maybe. But what was it about that piqued your interest?
I'd always loved animals, and I'd always been able to sense what they were feeling. And little did I know, it's just kind of like turning a knob to try and actually communicate with them, as one of my cats is kind of stalking.
Can you say more about what that means, turning a knob in order to?
It's just a little change in frequency.
Oh.
Where, because I kind of think of it like live people, dead people, live animals, dead animals.
Oh. Yeah, but categorizing it like that, I can see how helpful that would be.
And like archangels are way up here.
So it's kind of like, yeah, like a channel, like different channels.
And, I was taking all these courses, but I hadn't really actually quit my job.
Oh, so you were doing both.
I was doing both.
Wow.
And, my husband, I never told my husband any of this that I was doing. Because well,
that wasn't a
that's
scene.
one of the reasons why I'm now divorced from him. But and that year after I had gotten back from having the pulmonary embolism, I went to a shamanic healing camp.
Oh.
And that was life-changing.
Yeah, I'll bet.
That was right around the anniversary of my husband and I, our 30-year anniversary. and I realized that that relationship was toxic. Because this healing camp was amazing. It was up in the Poconos, and it was gorgeous, and I learned a lot about myself during that trip. And when I came back, we had just had, I was gone for our 30-year anniversary. But that Thursday, I told him I wanted to get separated. Sunday, I had a new apartment leased. The following Thursday, I was laid off from my job at Medtronic.
Wow. How did you receive that news? Considering how close in proximity it was to this other large change that you had just made.
Well, I knew I couldn't stay with Roger anymore. So I was like, I'm going for it.
Mm-hmm.
As they gave me a nice severance package.
Good.
And so I was living off of that. I started doing some dog walking and pet sitting to try and make that last longer. Been going through my savings now, but that's okay.
Well, yeah, and it just seems like the way it seems to me, not knowing all of the circumstances, of course, but that you had made a change, you had made a choice to change an aspect of your life, and you basically, chose you, right? And as you did
That's right.
that, it's like other things fell away, things that weren't necessarily in your best interest any longer.
And the job at Medtronic I had gotten into a position where I wasn't really very happy there anymore, and it was still very stressful. And so it was like a blessing in disguise,
Yeah.
because I would have, because of the security of the job, I would have stayed there probably forever.
Sure.
But this was a swift kick in my rear end. It says, no, this isn't for you anymore.
Yeah.
It's time to move on.
Well, some
And
people say when or when one door closes, others open, and that just sounds like that to me. Big time. It was a big
absolutely,
door.
because my life has changed so much since then. And it, it's absolutely right. I mean, one door closes and boom, 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 all these things just started happening. And it's like, okay.
Were those things then the things that you were talking about with like becoming a part of the Lightworkers Lab and doing all of the learning there? Are there other things that happened that represent that newfound life?
No, I just started trusting that the universe would provide. And, you know, every time I seemed to need money, something would always happen where I'd get money. Like I ended up winning 2 raffles to get $100 off my apartment rent,
Oh, that's great.
2 years in a row. And then I couldn't do a third year because then I ended up moving to South Carolina. But
Oh, were you in Memphis before that? You stayed in Memphis?
yeah,
Okay. It's so interesting.
because I had to wait for my divorce to be final.
Sure.
And yeah,
Now, were your 2 cats with you at that time? Or was that?
I had 1 cat, and then because we had 3 cats between
Oh,
my husband and I. The 2 boys loved to play together, and they would pick on Rosie. So, and one of the male cats had really bonded to Roger, and Roger had really bonded to it. But then when that cat passed away, my husband didn't want Heath.
okay.
So we ended up taking him, and it's been an adjustment, a lot of healing work and talking to, and
Well, I
yeah.
was I was going to ask you because you had said before when you had taken the animal communication class that one of the things you were hoping to utilize it for was to have your cats get along better. And I was curious what was involved with that and how, how they're getting along now, if it's these same cats.
They are, and they're getting along great. Also, because sometimes with your own animals, it's sometimes hard. Um,
Yeah, we'll have to talk later because our dogs are, well, actually, they're behaving themselves really well right now. But usually people can hear them at some point during the show because they really like to bark and they bark and bark and bark. One in particular. And I've been trying to communicate with her. I think she understands me to some extent, but not so much when it comes to the barking. And I have a really hard time understanding why, if there's something I'm not noticing. I know she's resentful probably about the other dog who joined us later and decided she was the alpha.
Oops.
So it created a really interesting dynamic there. But at the same point, it's like, yeah, it's so hard to do that because I'm always in their energy. And and the other people in our household are always in that energy. And so trying to separate that energy in order to really hone in on one is more of a challenge, I think, when it's our own. Plus, where's our energy incorporated into that? It's like,
Yes, because they are very empathetic, and they're like little sponges, and they absorb all of our emotions.
yeah,
And when I've done this energy work on, say, my stepmom's dogs, well, she has a golden retriever service dog that sometimes will get lazy, and so she'll ask me to talk to it, and after that he's doing perfectly again.
oh, that's good.
Very. And then she has a black lab who's, I'm thinking he might be autistic, but he would face a squirrel and go through an electric fence
Oh,
and end up on the road. And so I did my energy healing on him and talked to him, and now he won't go past the electric fence. He knows where that border is, and he won't go past it.
that's good.
So,
It's always scary when they run there. We don't even have an electric fence in our yard because we know that they would just go past. And so it's a false sense of security for us, but all of our neighbors have them and their dogs are fine. It's just ours.
yeah, and he used to not be that way, and now all of a sudden he did. But I'm thankful that I'm able to help her with her dogs like that. And I've helped somebody that had two dogs. One of them passed, and I helped with the grieving process, because she said, I look up and now he's acting his normal self. He's chewing on a bone. It's like, what did you do? It's like, well, just some energy healing and
That's
talking to him.
that's really helpful. I mean, we used to have two cats, and then, and you know how you said when you were a kid that the dog was like your sister. That's at the time, though the cats were our kids. I mean, it was one time my husband and I went out of town for a couple of weeks and had one of our neighbors watch them, and I gave them like a 5-page list of all of their quirks and things to look out for and stuff. Now, granted, I did the same with our daughter for one babysitting experience, so that is a part of me now, in the trust factor and all of that. But I just wanted to give them enough information to know how to how to not handle, but be with the cats. But when one of them passed, the other one completely changed her demeanor. It was really interesting. I mean, not all of her demeanor, but an aspect of it. She became the cat of the house, but we also had one dog at the time, and that relationship changed as well. It was really interesting to watch all of that, but that grieving piece is so real for the other animals, just as it is for the humans. And then they don't necessarily understand what happened, where we can use language to describe that if we need to. And I love that that's a part of what your communication approach includes.
Yeah, because a lot of the other animal communicators that I've taken classes from don't deal with the healing aspect. They just talk about the communication, which is good on its own. But when you add the healing piece,
Yeah.
it's wonderful.
Yeah, it is. It's nice. I love that you do that. I think that, or I don't even know where I was going to go. Totally just went blank slate. So, um, I was going to ask you, you'd brought up early on the religion thing, and then some of the uh, mystical experiences you had with your mom's was really profound, and your dad's as well. I mean, just that, the picture stayed where it was until he was ready to let it go. Um, and those things, how do you think I don't know, it sounds like you carried that with you for a long time when you were doing your work, your more professional orientation work. Were there things during that time that you we're still drawn to metaphysically or mystically or spiritually?
Oh yeah, all the shows that had like ghosts
Oh,
and
yeah.
and things like that on it. The mediums.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I used to like to watch John Edwards when he had that show on TV. I think Crossing Over with John Edwards or something like that. Um, I used to like watching like witch shows like Charmed and things like that. Um, so I always liked the mystical piece of it. But I just wasn't sure at the time how it fit into my life.
Sure. Did that make, when you decided to do the animal communication course, and that, which to me sounds like kind of that first step into incorporating, this world into that life, was there a transition or some type of change in your mindset that you had to work through in order to kind of make the leap? I know that, the job made the leap for you in some ways, but did you tell people you were doing this, or was it still something that was like held tightly because of?
Oh, I'm still in the spiritual closet.
Okay. Um, and I think that that's an actual, I mean, I think that's a step. It's like I know I personally went through that as well, where I had a professional existence, and I was cautious about who I would share my other interests with. And then more recently, well, it's not like I've really crossed over and, woven them together, but they are regularly being woven together, to where it's like I don't really care anymore what people in the professional realm think about my interests and passions on, mysticism, metaphysics, spirituality, energy, all of that stuff. But I used to be really concerned about it. And that's why I asked, because I think it is a phase that many people, I think, have to go through. Are there any experiences you care to share about that? And if not, that's okay. But
Well, I know my stepmom. Um,
oh, and family too. Yes.
Family and friends. I've got some friends that I don't know what they're going to think when I do come out of the spiritual closet. My dad's sister is still alive, and she's probably going to think I'm nuts. But my stepmom is a believer,
Oh,
and I don't know that I've shared everything with her, but she knows that I'm the animal communicator. Um, we had there was a mediumship. I'm trying to think of who. It was somebody from the lab that was doing trying to get more experience doing mediumship. Amy.
okay.
Now I can't think of her last name for the life of me.
That's okay. We can add that to the comments afterwards.
But she was doing this, she wanted to get more experience. So I did, and I said, if there's any messages for my stepmom or I from my dad. And she came through with it was such a beautiful reading. She pulled through a lot of great information, and I shared that with my stepmom. My stepmom was in tears. I was in tears. She passed along to my aunt. We haven't heard from her since.
Oh. Sometimes that happens.
So I don't know if she even listened to it or not, but because it was all recorded. My stepmom wanted to see if there was a couple of things in there that we weren't sure of, that if she could validate. But she never said anything, so I don't know about that one.
Sometimes people just aren't ready to hear it. They kind of have to come to it by those things in their own time and their own way.
And then my mom's side of the family are all strict Catholics, and so they're probably going to think I'm going to be damned to hell, pardon the French.
There seem to be a lot of people, a lot of people that I've talked to on this show who have that dynamic in their family where they were raised under a strict religious doctrine, and they have found that in some ways has informed and supported their spiritual and light workers journey, but in a way that other family members can't always understand or agree with, and
Yeah.
having to that whole path of, well, this is what's right for me, and how do you work with your family members, if you work with your family members on those things. It's not really up to us to decide what they can accept and what they can't. It's more about how can we accept who we are and let them make their own choices and being comfortable with that. That's a huge process, though.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And not everybody gets to that. Sometimes it's just friction.
And I think I'm coming closer to coming out of the spiritual closet. I'm just not there yet.
Sure. Well, and it's a transition and it's a journey, and that's what I love about these stories. Your story and other people I've talked to here in the mashup is that some people just jump right in right away. They dive in head first and they say, "This is me," and family can, do whatever they want. It doesn't matter. It doesn't always make those relationships easier, though. And other people just they need to wait until it's right for them. And I think that's a big piece of what I'm learning from all of your wonderful stories and others who have shared in this program, is that it's about knowing that your journey is different than everybody else's. And whatever that journey is what's right for you.
Right.
Yeah, so I really appreciate your sharing that. Well, what did other people make? Did they just, the thing with your mom happened with just you, so there wasn't anybody else there to witness that directly, but there were other people there at your father's funeral who witnessed that. Did anybody else notice that, or were they just saying, "Oh, it was just a technical glitch"?
I think they were just thinking it was a technical glitch.
It's so
But
easy
I
to write
mean,
that stuff off, and it isn't. It's like there's so many different ways that we have learned and been conditioned to write those things off, and it's like, yeah, but once it's like, yeah, you can
but I
say whatever
mean,
you want.
this was such a typical look for my dad. And it was like he was looking down at all of us. It's like, okay, what are you going to tell about me? Hmm? Hmm?
And I'm listening in, and I'm going to remember. If I see you in another incarnation, you're going to know it.
But luckily, my stepmom is real open to things like this. She had lung cancer. She beat it.
Good.
But she's doing all sorts of more holistic type treatments because she went through the chemo and the radiation, and it messed her up quite a bit. They say the treatment's worse than the disease. Well, in some case it is.
Yeah.
But she's been trying to do more holistic treatments, energy work, to try and get her health back, to get to where she was before, because it messed her up her throat a lot. She has a lot of scarring there. But she's cancer free now, and only doing the holistic energy work and things like that, and
Ooh,
she's doing great.
good. I'm really happy to hear that. And I mean, a lot of people come by their awakening through physical issues, like physical challenges. And I keep going back to when you were working and how you had said that you had issues with your back, but a lot of people who worked there did. Have you come up with any conclusions as to why that is? Was it just bad ergonomics or was it something else?
I, it could have been ergonomics, but I think everyone that was working there that had back issues were called to work there
Mm,
because we knew which doctors to go to for the treatments. We knew what options for treatments there were. Um, as far as I'm concerned, I think I was put in the right place at the right time, type of thing. Um, but yeah, it's
well, that and the that you had your experience with the pulmonary embolism and not remembering 3 days. Did you have any experiences at all during that time that you recall? And you may not, because it didn't sound like you did, but
well, it's just like dreams. I can't remember my dreams either,
mm,
so
yeah.
I don't recall. I think I was just out.
Well, someone maybe suggest you had received some pretty amazing attunements and downloads during that time. Because it sounds
Could
like
be. I don't know.
your path kind of diverted after that, yeah?
Yeah, it
Not
did.
not like that day, but
But I knew I was ready for something else. And it's like, okay, what can I do? What can I do?
yeah.
And so these three things popped up online. And it's like, okay, I'm going to try that. I'm going to try that. Between these three things, I should be able to find something else I can do.
Well, with the shamanic journeying, or that it was shamanic healing, is that what you had attended?
It was a shamanic healing camp. It was like a um, Thursday through Monday type thing. We were all in a cabin. We met in this teepee for the healing work, and it was just phenomenal. It was called the Blue Deer Center
Oh,
in Poconos.
it
If
sounds
anyone
wonderful.
ever wants a healing camp, they do it several times a year. It is absolutely wonderful.
Maybe that's another thing that I can add a link to in the comments section. There once was a time when I did show notes, and right now I've taken a hiatus from those, but I think that knowing these resources can be really helpful to those of you watching and knowing where else to go in your spiritual journey or the things that call to you. That shamanic healing seems like that was, like you had said, life changing. And the fact that you found it, it doesn't sound like you were just sitting there looking for where's a shamanic healing. Um,
Well,
or were you?
actually, my stepmom went to it
Oh,
first
wow.
and told me about it. And so when I was um, after I had my surgery and my pulmonary embolism, it's like that following year, it's all about healing for me.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things I did.
Well, it's wonderful. I mean, it sounds wonderful. And I love how, I mean, it had a dramatic influence on your life based on the things that happened following that. So, again, Julie, thank you so much for sharing all of these different aspects of your story. We're at an hour. I don't know if you realize that or not. See, I've told you,
Oh, wow.
everybody says how fast it goes, and it's like it really does. But I so appreciate your spending time with us today and sharing your journey. And I feel honored to have gotten to know you better myself as well. So I really appreciate your accepting my invitation, despite the fact we really didn't know each other very well. But I hope
Well,
we get
thank you
to,
for having me on your show.
yeah, it's my pleasure. Thank you all again for watching, and thanks to you again, Julie. And I wish everybody a magical, mystical day and weekend, and well, and beyond. All right. Take care. We'll see you again soon.
Bye.